Welcome to the Voices of Healing series with me, Annie.
Today, we are joined by Alec. He shares his journey as a psychiatric nurse and a de-escalation and aggression minimisation trainer, which has taught him the value of showing up as his real self. He talks about how being vulnerable and attentive can turn tough moments into chances for trust and healing, especially in places where emotions run high.
I'm honoured to be recording from Jara country and wish to acknowledge and pay our respects to the Jar Jar Wurrung people, the traditional custodians and caretakers of this land. We thank them for their care of country and honour their elders. Hello, Alec. How are you today?
Good, Annie. Thanks for having me.
I am very excited that you're here. You have your cup of tea, I see. What are you drinking today?
I've got a strong black tea with a dash of milk, no sugar.
Nice. I snuck a bit of honey in mine today. You know, some days you need to have the sweetness.
Yep, little treat.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, me and Alec know each other. We run in the same circles and we've also worked in the same places. But for those who don't know you, Alec, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Sure, yeah. Well, I am a psychiatric nurse, and I've been working as a nurse for probably just coming up to about 6 years now. So yeah, came to nursing and healthcare a little later on, compared to some I work with. But I think that's stood me in good stead so far. It's a really rewarding job. I guess I could give you a bit more than that, couldn't I? I could tell you that I work. I've primarily worked in adult acute psychiatry, inpatient psychiatry, at a major metropolitan hospital. And so I was there for 5 years, and then the last year I'm still in the same service, but I'm in an education kind of role now, which it's been a really nice sort of change, and I've learnt lots in like the new role that I'm in. And it's also nice because I still get to go back to my old ward and the wards and touch base with old colleagues and consumers alike, and yeah, it's cool job.
So when you are starting nursing, and I believe you started nursing in the depths of the COVID era.
Yeah, I would have started I think I was finishing my studies during lockdown. Some of the lockdowns I remember that I was going in to do like 6-week placement during no one else was allowed to leave home. I was trekking off for some work in a hospital and not getting any money. And then subsequently, started work, and we're still doing some lockdowns. I think my first shift on the ward that I worked on for 5 years, half of the staff were furloughed or made not to come to work, and we're all in hotel quarantine. So it was a pretty full on start to just kind of walk in. I was like, so sorry, don't really have any support for you, but good luck out there. Yeah.
With just inform me, in Australia when you do nursing, is it physical health, mental health, or are they put together and then you choose which direction you go into?
Yeah, they're 100% together. In fact, you probably only do a unit or so of mental health. It's interesting, like once you're actually working in a service and you're working with like lots of people from all around the world, like particularly strong cohort of Irish nurses that I've worked with, and they do a really comprehensive, like I think they do maybe 1 year of like general, and then they kind of, if you want to go down a mental health stream, for example, you specialize from like, year 2 and 3, I think. And then over here, it's very much like you do general nursing right to the end. And then if you want to work in mental health, it's pretty much like the expectation is that you would go and complete some postgraduate studies, which I did. So I went and did a postgraduate in mental health nursing, and then a master's in mental health nursing. So yeah, those first couple of years of working on the job, I just kept studying because I knew if I stopped studying, I'd never go back. So got it done, and now I have a master's in mental health nursing, and I don't plan on more study.
What made you do mental health or go down that avenue?
It's funny, like probably like a gut instinct, I would say, because of the way that, like we discussed, that the degree is kind of structured, and also just from a lot of like people, like family and friends in my life, were all sort of saying to me, "Oh, do general first. You can always go and do mental health afterwards, but go and consolidate your general nursing skills." And whilst I could understand where that was coming from, it just didn't sit right with me. And I think I changed my preferences with like a week to go and changed them all to mental health placements. I had done one mental health nursing placement at the Austin Hospital, which it was just completely different, I suppose, to the very task-driven nature of general nursing. So I think I just felt it suited my nature more to work within psychiatry. And probably on top of that, just like some of my own life experiences, like once I was like in that placement and once I actually started working, I felt like the fact that I was a little bit older, and maybe just had more time to experience more things in life gave me just a nice little edge to feel a bit more comfortable working in that environment, I think.
With that point of it suited more of your nature, I mean, I know you and I know you love an activity. And I think when you like activities, whether it's sports, arts, crafts, doing things, that can really suit to the mental health field. Do you think does that ring true for you, or what do you?
Totally. I'd love a lot more of that activity within like those, well, particularly the acute adult environment. I think there is still a lot of like documentation pressures and those kind of things that pull particularly nursing staff off the floor and away from people that they're working with and onto a computer. But 100% that level of connection. It's just the best way to build rapport, foster that trust, and become safe for someone, I suppose. So I've certainly enjoyed my games of chess and plenty of puzzles. Sometimes, you know, do you try and win every game? Do you play? How earnest do you be with? I was usually pretty earnest. I'm a pretty competitive person. I think there's a way to hold yourself whether you're winning or losing.
And that kind of relates to your new kind of field of education and going into that field. What is it that you do within the educational space now with nursing?
Yeah, so it's very specialized role, I suppose. The title of the role is a De-escalation and aggression minimisation trainer, which is a mouthful, but essentially it's like a mandatory training for all staff that work across the psychiatric side of the hospital. And I guess it's just to help promote personal safety for people, but also therapeutic communication, I suppose, and ways to engage with people and to, promote empowerment, I guess, at the end of the day. So I think, again, it wasn't actually a role that I didn't sort of spot it, apply for it and chase it. Someone shoulder tapped me and said, "Hey, you should think about doing this." So I'm really appreciative to that person because, it's been a really cool experience. Also, just to sit in a room with, a big cohort of clinicians all from different disciplines as well, and hear, what works and what doesn't work, and different people, bring their own life experience into these roles and jobs, and it's not a one size fits all. Like when it comes to de-escalation, there's no magic script. It's about leaning into being an authentic kind of version of yourself, I suppose. So, it's been a nice little sort of trajectory for myself, I suppose.
Totally. And with that, you saying like people come from different disciplines, they bring their own experiences in how they relate to the work. What about your lived experience to this type of work now?
I guess there's probably a few things I've, done a fair bit of reflection over the years about why this sort of work and working in psychiatry is kind of suited to me, or why I feel like I get some real satisfaction out of working in this area. Probably the two main things that I end up coming back to are probably some early life experiences around death. There was just a fair bit of death around me growing up. And I guess without really knowing what I was, observing at the time, I think I was seeing the effects of trauma, and how it, what it did for different people, how it manifested, and how it impacted people's functioning. And of course, I've only got kind of the language to put around that sort of now working in the area, but I think that did kind of draw me to psychiatry. And then I guess the sort of the second thing is, different points of my life, like, like we said before, I only made it to, I think I started studying nursing at 29. And sort of before that, I'd tried my hand at a few different degrees and acting and playing music and, spending a lot of times in pubs and clubs and bars and that kind of thing from those kind of industries. And probably had some of my own coping strategies that like were harmful as well in their own ways. So I feel like it gave me a bit of an experience of I didn't really know where to next. And then it just sort of feels like I fell on my feet. Yeah, so I think they're probably the two things. And I guess, coming back to just that general life experience of having had a chance to travel, to have different relationships, to, just get a more worldly view. And hence, I guess, I'm working next to some people that are probably like 21, gone straight from high school to studying and into a job. And it's like, in the ways that people communicate and, they've still got a lot of growth to come. Don't get me wrong, some 20-year-old nurses are incredible. But yeah, I think that's kind of, I guess, some of the lived experience that I feel like really drew me into coming along to nursing.
There's so many interesting points there. I've been trying to hold on to some of them. I think the first really interesting point that I heard from you was around death. And I feel like something that I see in the psychiatric unit or working in acute mental health is you have the most realist conversations in those spaces. They're like some of the most real conversations I have with people a week. And they often, though, when I'm working with people, they're really drawn to things that I think we really reflect to when death is around us. What's of it important to us? What do we care about? Looking at art, music, nature, like those themes just come up and up. Something I've probably said before, and I'll say it again, is, like when when you're at someone's funeral and you're looking at the perfect things to say, and there isn't quite that thing, but you pick out a poem and you say a poem because it just seems to encapsulate what you're trying to hold and the message. And thinking about those connections in those spaces, like I just think the things that make us human just interweave more and more in these spaces, and that's what where healing and connection can really happen. I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense there, but I think just
I totally
that theme
I get
of
where you're coming from. Yeah, because I mean, even like, some of the deaths that was sort of referenced earlier was, like my brother, and I remember being at his funeral as an 8-year-old, and my dad got up and played a song that he had written. So I think that sort of speaks to what you were talking about there, that sometimes that sort of art is a really, really helpful connection and a way to articulate an emotion that's kind of underneath. And probably in some of my dad's songwritings probably said more about his experience than like words have ever said to me, probably. So I totally can understand that and certainly agree with the sentiment about those kind of really real conversations that you do have kind of when realistically in an acute adult inpatient environment, people are often at their most vulnerable and kind of like hardest times of people's lives, I would say sometimes. So yeah, I often have said to people in those settings, like if they're crying or something like that, I'd say like, well, like if you can't cry in a psych ward, where can you cry? Like and it almost brings a tiny wedge of humor or lightening that moment or something. But also there's a lot of truth in that as well, that like you are allowed to kind of, it should be a place where people can kind of let it all go and let it out. And whether people feel safe enough to do that is another question. But that was always my aim working in that environment, was just to be safe enough. and build connection and be human. Like, yeah.
Well, what's kind of beautiful is like when you think about that really vulnerable time, like with your dad playing that song, all you had to do was listen, and there was a shared witnessing, and that was enough. And I think that really, really relates to what you're saying within the psych unit. Sometimes it's not about having the answers, it's just about that connection, validation, witnessing, and of that emotion and that space that can just simply be enough.
Yeah, and I think that it's like something that you almost have to learn or unlearn, not being solution focused, like not trying to solve things. And that's still like, I think for most humans, like we have a tendency towards trying to problem solve whatever's put in front of us. And yeah, it's been an interesting learning curve and I'm still learning that how to take a step back and just absorb and listen. And like you say, like validate and show that empathy for people. But yeah, you don't have to have all the answers. And maybe it's something, you go through all these studies and got to know all these things about blood pressures and whatnot. And it's like there's this sort of internalized expectation. It's like, I should have the answers. I want to help people. And it just turns out that, one of the answers and ways to help people is to just like actually let them get it off their chest, like you were saying, and let people tell their story, and doesn't necessarily need to be solved. Yeah.
So if we use that word strategies to build trust with people, patients, clients, listening, connecting through activity, we've kind of talked about. Any other kind of tips or anything else that comes to mind?
Yeah. There's lots of, I guess, strategies and tips. It almost feels weird to use those terms. They are the most appropriate, but authenticity is so important. So if someone gets a sense that you're using a strategy to kind of try and connect with them, that it's probably gonna.
I think that's where humour. You mentioned humour or a bit of a joke or laughter. That shows such when you really connect through a little bit of humour, that's immediately just shows so much authenticity, doesn't it, from person to person?
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, just being genuine, and if and if we say things in moments that like don't work, if you try and use a bit of humor and it's not the right time for whatever reason, that you can sort of still own that situation and apologize and be authentic in that. And, I think, there's a lot to be said for what's actually important in so many of our relationships, whether it's in a clinical, psychiatric setting or just in our lives. It's so much more about the repair, than the rupture. Mm-hmm. So, but just to get back to your initial sort of question, a few other, like using there's a few really simple ones, but like one that comes to mind is using people's names, like just actually using people's names, becoming more familiar in that kind of way, I think is just such an easy tip. Getting on the same level as people, like often in that acute inpatient environment, there's like people have had a lot of medications sometimes, and some of those medications can be quite sedating. So people are often sitting, even if they don't really want to be sitting. And, standing over people is just like not a very nice way to, I guess it showcases the inherent power dynamic that's kind of at play in those environments. So I always made a real effort I spent a lot of time kneeling, in truth. So getting on people's levels, and even like other really simple thing that seems kind of trivial, but like even the attire, like the clothing that I would wear, like I'm wearing a band t-shirt now, but I would often, we weren't mandated to wear like a uniform or scrubs or anything like that, which I really appreciated because it did just help minimize the power differentials and also just, a point of connection. That's a cool t-shirt. What's that? And then, a story. Oh, have you seen any cool bands lately? And all of a sudden, from an item of clothing that you're wearing, you're kind of like, connecting with people. Yeah.
I think I always say clothing's a really big one as well for the therapist or the clinician, because then they get to feel authentic within their workplace. I think the more authentic you can be, the safer you are within your role as well. How, with that kind of connection and honesty, and I think that's a really good point as well, with safety, whenever I feel unsafe, I think this is a really good tip, is I just say it. I just am like, oh, I'm feeling a bit unsafe, and not try and hold it all. And again, like with that introductions of the names, I remember like I would always, because I think it's really important, we have all this medical information, but sometimes it can be wrong. So like when meeting someone, hey, is it Alec? Is that what you like to be called? Again, that just like that personal little build. When do you have any tips because we obviously have to be really careful when we are saying information about ourselves or connecting with someone, and there's that crossover between like being professional and connecting and authenticity to then being too personal or crossing those boundaries. Any tips for that, or how to walk that line?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think like I've seen different clinicians maybe share more than I would be willing to maybe share about their personal life and hard, but yeah, I don't think that there's any real hard and fast like answer to that question. I just think that like whatever I would be sharing, I would be comfortable with that person then sharing with everyone else in the environment potentially. So, figuring out where your own kind of boundaries lie around that is a very unique sort of self-exploration, I think, and you probably only really figure that out by maybe crossing the boundary sometimes, like maybe saying something and then it's like, oh, I feel a bit uncomfortable that I've shared too much now. So, yeah, I don't know if that's a really full kind of answer to your question, but like even sometimes when conversations have strayed into kind of, an area that is maybe where I'm starting to think about how much do I share here, even just calling that out sometimes, and just being like, well, I won't go into too much detail about X, Y, Z, but I can empathize with where you're coming from there. I've had a similar experience or whatever it may be. But I think, yeah, again, it's like not hiding. It's like you sort of mentioned the idea of like if you're feeling uncomfortable sometimes, like actually just putting that out there and letting someone know that like, oh, I feel a bit unsafe, or you're scaring me. Those kind of things can be enough sometimes to just be a circuit breaker in like a conversation as well. So yeah, they're kind of good points that you raised.
Yeah, I think like, again, like sometimes the professional, it's good to sometimes remember like, remember like I am your nurse, or, you don't want to say I'm not your friend, but, I'm not here on, that I'm helping you through the medical, or I'm, just to hold that professional where you stand. So you are there to help them. So it's not sometimes I feel like people feel sometimes that they owe you something. And I'm like, oh no, I get paid to be here. This is my job. I'm here to help. So sometimes, people sometimes feel like they owe you something, or they're in debt to you. And it's like, oh no, I'm a nurse, I'm employed here. So I think always holding that your professional identity, as long as you do it in a friendly, authentic way, like you say, then that's great.
Yeah, and I think like some people, just the way they are probably just hold themselves a bit more professionally, and that like feels normal and natural, and then some people maybe like me are a little more informal, and I guess the trick in terms of communicating when that's kind of your style, whether it means that you might swear occasionally or that kind of thing, it's like following the lead of the person that you're working with. So like you're kind of uniquely tailoring the way that you communicate, but also sort of fitting in line with your natural sort of self as well. Yeah.
Which is a really good point, because not everyone's going to connect with every therapist or every nurse, and some people will work better with some nurses, and obviously you can't match perfectly on every shift, but it is about, using the team's connections and relationship skills to what is going to suit some people in that space for that time.
Yeah, definitely. I remember, like, and it's an important part of like de-escalation, I suppose, is that like self-reflection of knowing where you're at. What are you bringing to the table, like in any kind of conversation with someone. Like, again, I sort of said it earlier with like people can tell if you're being fake, but like people can tell if you're afraid or if you're really nervous, and or maybe it's not even that they can tell exactly what that is, but it might be your body language. If you're kind of a bit closed off, they could think, oh well, they're disinterested, don't care about what's happening for me. So it's having that sort of level of self-awareness and self-reflection that becomes really important, I think, in those spaces. And I'll give you a small example of such. Would have been, I was pretty fresh. Maybe I'd been working for a year, but fairly unprovoked. I mean, I'd obviously had some interactions with this person, and maybe something had happened that I wasn't even aware of. But the person came up to me and just threw a cup of hot coffee over the front of me, and obviously, I don't care who you are. If that happens to you, you're going to be pretty shocked in that moment. But I did have the ability to just reflect that I was like, I need, like, whatever happens from here, I'm not the right person to be having the next conversation. Like, I need to actually remove myself. If we're going to, if there's going to be some de-escalation in a discussion that happens from here, that's probably not going to be me. And I did end up getting to keep working with that person a bit later on, once I guess I'd had a chance to regulate from the shock of that situation. But yeah, as much as the best way to learn how to effectively de-escalate is to just get in there and tank it and muck it up. It's also to know when to get out, step back, let someone else and yeah, like you say, lean on the fact that these are multidisciplinary team environments where even just from a disciplinary point of view, sometimes people are just like, they're not going to want to talk to a doctor. I'm not going to, from whatever maybe previous experiences, or it could be nurses. So maybe they want to talk to an art therapist, and then you lean on those sort of team structures and work with what's going to work best for that person, I suppose.
That kind of touches more underrated areas, especially with nurses, but I feel so important about supervision and reflective areas, debrief areas, to hold those, like, I'm finding this tough, or this person threw some coffee on me, let me just have my human response before then I can have my clinical kind of brain in. Do you have any kind of reflections on the supervision space, or do you kind of promote that within your work, or what does that look like?
Yeah, definitely promote it. I think it's really important. It's interesting, I guess, thinking from the discipline's perspective. I know psychologists, it's very much mandatory, I think, to have supervision. I think same with social workers, a lot of different disciplines, it's really ingrained and inbuilt into the way the profession kind of works, the structure of, becoming that job or doing that job. Whereas in nursing, it's a lot more informal. There's not any sort of mandatory supervision. The work environments that I've worked in they've provided, group supervision or reflection sessions that are good. But yeah, it's certainly a space within nursing, I think, that probably needs to keep growing, because all the research out there suggests that it's very beneficial for people not to burn out, for organizations to retain staff. So yeah, it is certainly something in the education space that I really advocate for clinicians to seek that, whether it's external or, there are avenues within certainly public hospitals to, talk to someone that can link you in with someone to be a supervisor. And yeah, those spaces can look however you want them to look, I think, whether it is just a big dumping ground of just have your human responses to things, or whether it's seeking advice about the best ways to manage clinical situations. But yeah, just really helpful space. I admittedly have probably not done as much supervision as in fact, once I was advocating for it in the education space, I was I need to seek more of my own supervision, even though I'm not working within a real face-to-face role day to day with consumers. But yeah, it's still been really beneficial, even in my current role, which I've got another very senior educator that's been a supervisor for me now. So it's been really nice to get their perspective on things. And, I think a lot of us experience that imposter kind of syndrome of, oh, should I be doing this? And it's just sort of grounding to know that that's very common. Yeah, a lot of us have that.
Yeah, I think one of the things I found when I've held supervision spaces or reflective spaces with nurses particularly is, nurses everywhere in psychiatric units definitely work bloody hard. So, and they're kind of on the floor, they're doing it all day. And then sometimes when an incident happens and then you go, right, now can you talk about it? And it's like, do you know what? I just want to get home. I just want to relax I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to keep going over it. And just again, like the clinical work and being so busy, it's hard to then really stop and change that space. But it is really important. It was so inbuilt in my education, my masters, our work, our regulations, art psychotherapists, therapists, that, I think because it's not in that educational, and I really learned how to be in the supervision space and what it meant. But maybe that's the answer, for it to be more in those educational spaces when you're building the nurses.
Yeah, it's an interesting point, because it's even like the same, I think, from, whenever an incident happens that may affect staff, you can probably guarantee that incident's probably also affected the, patients or consumers involved in it as well. And it's the same. It's like sometimes you need that space from it, like that post-incident support, when we're thinking about kind of providing, if someone's had to have some restrictive interventions utilized to maintain safety or something, that like, who's the best person to maybe debrief with that person? When is the best time? I would say it's the same for staff as well. So like having flexibility around that, and maybe space from events. I think there is some research out there about like, it being at least 24 to 48 hours for people to process a bit before you really, trying to get people to retell their tale or something. But it's an interesting sort of conversation. I think, it's the same again for both staff and consumers, that like, just like check in, like offer the space to be able to have a conversation. And if it's not wanted, then don't push it. Because who would you be pushing it for? You'd be pushing it for yourself, really, not for the actual person involved. But I would, educational landscape, I'd call that re-establishing therapeutic rapport, like just connecting again.
Which I'm going to segue that into actually talking about kind of for loved ones, carers at home, like giving people that space both ends. I know when it's been my own family and there's been quite an aggressive incident, normally prompted by a maybe psychosis or a manic episode or whatever you want to call it, actually having the little deep, time apart to just breathe and, let the things settle down. What advice would you give to someone who is handling maybe aggression within the home or with a loved one, whether it's a child or a partner?
Well, it's a hard question to answer, because
it's a very wide question.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's a good question. I think that first sort of point that you noted about like that bit of space is crucial. I know even for myself, like if I am dysregulated at home with my partner and we're, there's some conflict, we're having an argument, whatever it is, we take different amounts of time to regulate. And that can be really hard, because maybe someone's ready to, I need what my nervous system needs is to get in there and talk about this and find some resolution and come back together. And at the same time, the other person might really just need a break from it for a bit, like just to have, for me, it probably takes an hour. It probably takes an hour of not talking, to kind of get my, prefrontal cortex back online and be able to kind of have a more balanced conversation where I'm regulated. So that's certainly, I think, an important point. I think having support networks, like having people outside of whatever, like whether it's the family context or whatever, having people that you can lean on, like, and talk to and feel safe with is obviously vital. And I mean, so I guess an extension of that is like, it's okay to ask for help. Like you can ask for help. And I guess this is where it gets maybe tricky, in terms of like if you're thinking from that domestic violence lens or anything, that I know that, people asking for help can also potentially be risky. Like it can potentially, put people in more vulnerable situations. But so that's where I'm sort of hesitant to say there's no real hard and fast way, obviously, to manage these things. But asking for help is really important. And of course, there's lots of different services, even in Victoria, whether it's, I'm sure you probably know them better than me, Annie, but like, off the top of my head, there's Orange Door, there's 24/7 crisis support, numbers that, it's confidential and anonymous, obviously 000, but, so yeah, I think connecting, like, I think because basically healing is relational, is what I've sort of learned in my career, like whether it is with friends, family, clinicians, it's the connection and the relational space that gives the chance to sort of heal and I guess promote safety and yeah, for us to be regulated so we can engage in those moments where it doesn't feel as safe. Yeah.
I totally agree with you, Alec. I think another thing is sometimes with that connecting or asking people, when we're really in a situation, especially sometimes with coercive control or domestic abuse, you kind of don't know sometimes, or it's hard to know what's normal and is this aggression, or is this okay, or is this safe, or is this person just annoyed? So I think checking in and talking, I've had lots of conversations, as a therapist, where someone's spoken through something and I'm like, this isn't a normal thing, or you shouldn't have to go through this. So I think that checking in with other people and just being like, oh, this happened, sometimes I feel like we have to keep everything, we have to manage everything, whether it's a parent or a carer. You're like, no, I'm the person who's meant to be holding this. And so you kind of keep things sometimes like to yourself, and that's where it can get dangerous and things can build up and there may be mistreatment or abuse within that. So yeah, talking and asking, and if you don't feel comfortable, like you said, doing that with maybe someone you can pick up the phone and speak to Orange Door or someone and kind of talk through a situation. Yeah. I think also something you've touched on is how aggression or violence or abuse, it is so many different levels and so many different categories. If we say abuse, that's not just physically hitting someone. There's all different types of abuse, and anger is a physical emotion that we're all going to experience. And sometimes we find it really hard, or people find it hard to tolerate anger or know what to do with it, or have a learnt experience of how to be with anger, especially, for a lot of males, and especially at the moment with all the scary stuff that's being put out there on the internet, with how to be a man and how to, hold anger within yourself. Yeah, there's not just one way, but I think I really like the point that you've said that, like, we all regulate in different ways and we all have these emotions and difficult things can come up. Yeah, it's a difficult topic.
Yeah, I like your comments about it. They resonates with me a lot. So multifaceted.
I was going to say, with your safety and your own safety when managing aggressive behavior, how I mean, I know for me, like my advice, like when I'm working with a trainee or someone new in kind of an area where there may be aggression, I kind of always say, trust your gut. Your gut's your best thing, like normally. And I always use a bit of a metaphor. I think this probably speaks more to womb holders, but I'm like, if you were pregnant, would you do this? Like because a lot of the times, like I found it during my pregnancies, the rules were completely shifted. No, you can't do this. Yes, you can do this. Suddenly everything changed. And it was like, oh, hang on a minute. Isn't my own safety the same? And I completely understand that, why we do create a lot more safety when there's a little human life there. But I always thought that was a really good compass to be like, okay, I'm going into this space. Would I do this? Because it's amazing what we do put ourselves through when we think, oh, no, I can just do it, or I can get on with it. And sometimes we'll put ourselves in unsafe positions. And I think the more trained you get and the more experience you get, the more you can say no. And I always think that shows a really good level of maturity. Do you have any kind of safety measures when managing aggressive behaviour for your own safety?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, like, you know, if your baseline was like, oh, if I feel unsafe, I'm not going to engage in that, then you probably never engage in many conversations working in the IP or the inpatient unit. So it is challenging because you do have to sort of step outside your comfort zone a fair bit. There's probably some things though, like I think what you mentioned about like your gut instinct is like we should listen to that. Like if your body is telling you that something's not right or it's not safe, then like at least not ignoring that, I think, is really important. Certainly a message that, particularly with training, clinicians that do home outreach where there's not layers of hospital support around, then that becomes even more vital that you listen to. People would be in a pair usually, and if one person of that pair said something doesn't feel right here, then you would go with that lowest threshold of risk assessment, I suppose. And then in terms of, I guess, practical things like, personal safety, like how far away do you stand from someone? Like how do you stand? There's a few like very literal sort of things you can do to keep yourself safe. And I guess that's kind of reassuring as a clinician, if you've got a bit of training about like, well, if this goes as badly as it could go, how do I keep myself safe? And then often if you've kind of got those thoughts in mind, then you're probably giving off some signs that you feel a bit more comfortable. So maybe things don't go as badly as they could go. Having said that, sometimes you just got to run as well. Like I've done, it would have been some Benny Hill music behind this scene would have been appropriate, but I've run around some furniture and couches in our environments when there's been a misunderstanding, or that particular incident was a SIM card. Someone felt that I was in possession of their SIM card, and so when they pulled it out of their own pocket when we were running around the couch, sorry. The trigger was removed and it all was well. But yeah, look, I think that in terms of like treating people with dignity and respect is just so crucial, even when, we get into some of those really, I don't even know what the best way to say this is, whether it's a necessary evil. Don't know if I agree with that, but like some of the restrictive interventions to, their last resort measures. But even within that, just trying to hold that what it would be like for the person on the other side of that is so important, and I think can probably make all the difference. Like in your communication, like trying to remove as much of the unknown about what's happening in those circumstances as possible, because I think fear is just such a massive driver of aggression, probably. So yeah, I don't know. Did I answer your question?
No, yeah. I feel like I could talk so much about this, so much more, and I'm aware of time. But yeah, I always think like when I was in the psychiatric unit, I was like, even though that it's a place to help people get better, but I think as humans, if we're encaged or in somewhere, our whole human being or soul, like an alarm bell goes off to be like, we need to get out of here, we need to be free. And I think, of course, in all work, like it just has to be trauma informed. Like it kind of blows my mind sometimes when it's like, we work in a trauma-informed way. And I'm like, if you're working in mental health, or if you're working with people, if you're working at the swimming pool, like you're working with people, it has to be trauma-informed, everything. So I think that's just like such a important point.
Yeah.
And like trusting the people we work with to some degree of like, don't push. If they're saying like, I'm not comfortable with this, don't push, which is really hard, I think, from a nursing point of view, because sometimes you've got to give them the meds, or you've got someone saying, you need to get this information. So you feel that you need to, and the person's saying, I don't want to do that. And that's where, that tension can really build.
Yeah, definitely. It's like, it is challenging. Like I do, like, empathize not only with consumers in that environment, but also with staff, because like you say, like there is times where, people are on some compulsory treatment and they have to have, certain medication or something. And, I guess it's those trauma-informed care kind of principles that you try and come back to, like try and increase safety, increase trustworthiness, give people choice, like collaborate, like make them involved in that situation. And even with all that, sometimes you still end up in this place that just doesn't feel very nice. And that's probably one of the bigger challenges of working in, particularly that setting, I suppose, within psychiatry. But yeah, again, I guess that brings us straight back to like, the support and getting that supervision and reflecting and doing the repair afterwards, like, because that's sometimes it's really needed. And if you don't do the repair, then, what does that mean for that person? Do they have a fractured relationship with the whole health service because of one particular moment? Can we spend time afterwards to try to preserve the overall relationship? I feel passionate about that. I think for a long time in healthcare, there's been a lot of work done kind of in those earlier parts. Like if people are escalating, like what do we do when people escalate? And I think only more recently am I really seeing a shift towards like, how do we follow up afterwards? Like, how do we maybe even shift the impacts of that event, like whether it will become a trauma, like for someone or not. We have some, we can connect, and it could mitigate some of those sort of things blaring up and being lifelong, traumas for people. So it's really, really important.
Well, I suppose that's where, the healing comes in. And I've been really looking at the word healing because of the name of this series that I called Voices of Healing and the problems with that word. But I think, it's, the introduction and the hellos are really important. But like you said, the goodbyes and the repair, and that's where the kind of healing and the work can happen, especially what you said earlier, those community and connection with other people and interrelational points is where the healing happens. It's not just like a sole individual thing.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think even for me, when things have happened in my life, like there's a tendency that I'm like, I want to go and cocoon away for a bit and like heal. And I guess the older I've gotten and the more life experience I've had, the more I've realized that, unfortunately for me, I need to do the connection, is actually what's going to help me heal, is the connection with people.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes we need that rest. I know I get my energy by being by myself. So, to have those connections and reach out, I do need a bit of like, all right, let's get the battery powered up to like then go out and seek those connections and those things. Yeah. I think I just want to end on that. Although we've talked about lots of really difficult things within this work and the spaces that we both work, but we also really enjoy and love our work. And the people we work with, because you do have these amazing connections. And I mean, personally, like I love working with some of the people that are just do struggle to emotionally regulate. And, you know, being honest, it's because it reminds me of some of my closest family members and those family members and their sensitivities and their big hearts and their love. But how the world can just become so overwhelming sometimes. But when you do make those connections or help, it can be so raw and, like I said, honest. And truthful, and these golden nuggets that happen when you're working. And I learn so much from the people I work with and their stories and how they hold themselves. Is there anything that you like? What would you say, like, why you keep going back to the work and what keeps you staying in it?
Yeah, it's the people. Like, it's the people that you work with. Like, and I probably didn't like emphasize that enough at the start as why I was drawn to it, because I just like people and you know, connecting with people, and I get on with most people that I've, you know, met in my life, and you know, the stories and the laughs that happen alongside or some of the more difficult moments of that, you know, inpatient environment. I guess I value, like, it's a privilege to be in those spaces with people, and so yeah, it can take a lot, but it gives a lot.
Sadly, we better wrap up, but do you have any final words, Alec?
Oh, just thank you for running this series. I think it's really cool to get different people's perspectives on, you know, healing and working in kind of mental health, and or you know, just having lived experience in that world as well. So yeah, thanks for doing some great work on the side, and I'm really proud to be part of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Alec. That's made my day. Okay, everyone, tune in next time. Bye. As we wrap up this episode of Voices of Healing, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to our wonderful guests for sharing their invaluable insights and personal stories. Stay connected for more inspiring conversations, expert insights, and practical advice. If you want to be part of the series or want more information, get in touch either through our website or Instagram. Thank you for joining us today. And until next time, be kind and take care of yourself and those around you.